The worst ways to die in history. To be beautiful in the Victorian era, you had to be very, very thin. This was naturally quite hard to achieve, but there was one diet that was all the rage. The tapeworm diet. The patient would willfully take a pill containing the egg of a tapeworm, which they then raise inside of their stomach for months until it grew to maturity, feeding on all of their calories and helping them to achieve that coveted 16-inch waist. That's to say if it didn't kill them first. Most tapeworms attach to the intestine, but larvae can also attach to the heart, eyes, lungs, or brain. They can grow up to 30 feet long, and excreting one is a horrific experience that can take days.
Today we're looking at the craziest ways people have died.
So in 1988, a dog fell from a building, landing on a woman's head, killing them both instantly, while a nearby walker stopped to watch it all unfold and was run over by a bus, which then led to an older man dying from a heart attack from the shock of the entire thing. An Indian woman was trampled to death from a vengeful elephant who remembered how a few years back she kidnapped her baby. The elephant also returned a second time at her funeral and trampled on her corpse.
Welcome back. Thank you to all the channel members for support. For this video, I definitely said viewer discretion is advised. There isn't anything too crazy, but sometimes some of the stories might give you some graphic imagery. What's very killer about this episode is that it says around 70% of you guys are not subscribed, so make sure to smash that subscribe button. If you guys like the video, make sure to smash that like button. Let's go.
Emmett Till, an African-American boy from Chicago, went to Mississippi during the summer of 1955 to visit his great-uncle, Moses Wright. Keep in mind that the South at the time was under strict Jim Crow laws, enforcing racial segregation and extreme discrimination against black people. On August 24, 1955, Till and a group of other black teenagers went to Bryant's Grocery and Meat Market, a small store owned by a white couple, Roy and Carolyn Bryant. Carolyn Bryant later accused Till of whistling at her, making lewd comments and possibly touching her hand. Although decades later, she admitted that parts of her testimony were false. On the night of August 28th, her husband, Roy Bryant, and his half-brother, J.W. Milam, armed and enraged, forced their way into Moses Wright's home and Emmett Till at gunpoint. They dragged him out of bed while his terrified relatives watched helplessly. They first took him to a barn where they severely beat him. They out one of his eyes, his jaw, and out some of his teeth. They pistol so brutally that his face was unrecognizable. Witnesses said they heard the beating and crying from the barn. They then made him carry a 75-pound cotton gin fan, tied it to his neck with barbed wire, and shot him in the head with a .45 caliber Colt pistol. When his body was eventually found, it sparked public outrage, making it one of the most important cases for the civil rights movement. So much so that Rosa Parks cited his murder as part of the reason she refused to give up her bus seat. Despite overwhelming evidence, the jury acquitted Bryant and Milam of murder in just over an hour. Some jurors even claimed they would have reached a verdict sooner if they hadn't taken a break for soda.
I remember watching a movie on Amazon Prime depicting that. I think it's called like Till. It's either called Till or Emmett, something like that. I think it's called Till. And I remember like seeing that. I was like, yo, that is insane, dude. Over something that wasn't even that bad or that she even made up, which is crazy. Because Emmett Till was a young kid too. He wasn't like a teenager. I think he was like in his early teens at most. Because like he was a young kid and then...
Here's some of the craziest deathbed confessions. So a Hollywood actor named Margaret Gibson admitted during her last breath that she was responsible for murdering the prolific director William Desmond Taylor, while Henry Lucas, a convicted serial killer, confessed on his deathbed that he lied about everything and didn't actually kill anybody. Christian Sperling confessed that the famous 1934 photo of the Loch Ness Monster was a hoax, and that they constructed a model of the creature to pass it off as real. Earl Van Best confessed to being the Zodiac Killer in his final moments, while Walter Pecka confessed to being D.B. Cooper, one of the most famous criminals in history, who hijacked a plane and extorted a ransom of $200,000 before escaping in a parachute and never being seen again. Joseph Valacchi provided details on the Mafia in his final moments, becoming the first Mafia member to publicly acknowledge the Mafia in the United States. Francis Thompson had one of the most jarring confessions, stating that he killed his entire family 40 years prior. And finally, James Brewer confessed to murder of a man 32 years earlier in his final moments, but he ended up surviving and then was later arrested for his confession. That's crazy. These are some of the weirdest ways that people have died. So in 1988, a dog fell from a building, landing on a woman's head, killing them both instantly, while a nearby walker stopped to watch it all unfold and was run over by a bus, which then led to an older man dying from a heart attack from the shock of the entire thing. An Indian woman was trampled to death from a vengeful elephant who remembered how a few years back she kidnapped her baby. The elephant also returned a second time at her funeral and trampled on her corpse. Also in India was a man who was urinating on a train track when all of a sudden he was struck by a flying cow that was hit by a train, killing him instantly. A horse jockey from Ireland named Frank Hayes died from a heart attack in the middle of a race, and his horse actually won while it was carrying Frank's body still on it. A student at Kiev Polytech was killed by chewing gum after he accidentally laced it with a citric acid-like powder to increase the gum's sour taste, which instead exploded upon mixing with his saliva. And finally, a man named Jeffrey Bush was lying in bed in his Florida home when all of a sudden a sinkhole appeared under his bedroom and took him in it, and he was never seen again. So rest in peace.
That last one was so random. If that doesn't prove that anytime at any moment you could just, I don't know what will. He was just laying there. He didn't do anything. He was in the safety of his house.
The worst ways people have died, part 11.
A woman entered a man's apartment in a manic and crazed state. She rushed in and began to throw and break the man's things, absolutely destroying the apartment. She then ran back out into the hallway where she began fighting with her boyfriend, who lived there. The man immediately called the police, the woman crawled into the garbage chute and fell 16 stories into a dumpster. Police found her unconscious in the dumpster with serious head injuries, and she did not survive.
Follow for more.
What is some of the craziest stuff people have confessed to as they're dying? Well, in this series, I'm going to read to you some of the craziest ones I could find. This story comes from a hospice nurse that was dealing with a patient who had fought in the Vietnam War. Early on in his treatment, she actually asked him if he had any siblings, and he mentioned that he did have a brother, but he passed away in Vietnam. He also had a wife who had previously passed away, and because of this, he didn't have a lot of people that would come visit him. The man had dementia, and the nurse said that at times it felt like he was digging deep into his brain to find moments from his life that he could describe to the nurse in vivid detail. So one night the nurse comes in, and the man is in really rough shape, like it looks like he's not going to make it through the night. And when she walks in, he starts beckoning her over, like, come here, come here, come here. So the nurse comes over, and the man begins to tell her that his brother wasn't killed by an enemy soldier in Vietnam. He had actually killed his brother. And not only that, but these men were twins, so when the brother died, the other one fully assumed his identity when he came back to the States. Meaning that when he came back from the war, he took his brother's entire life, including his wife. The man ended up passing away that night, and later on the nurse told his daughter what she had heard. And the daughter did not believe her at all, but then years later, she finds a handwritten confession from her father stuffed in a Bible. What are some of the craziest things that people have confessed to at the end of their lives? Well, in this series, I'm going to show you some of the wildest stories I found. And I cover all sorts of spooky and true crime stuff on this page, so make sure you follow along. So this story comes from a woman who was helping her mother at the end of her mother's life. The woman actually lived in Europe, but her mom lived in China, so when she got the call that her mother wasn't doing very well, she made the long journey all the way back. And right when she gets there, her mother asks all the doctors and nurses to leave the room. She apparently wanted to be absolutely alone with her daughter. So the daughter's like, what's up, are you okay? And the mom tells her she knows she doesn't have a lot of time left, so there's something she really wants to tell her. Her mother proceeds to tell her that she's not actually her biological mother. And obviously this comes as like a huge shock to the daughter, but it's nothing compared to what came next. The mother proceeds to tell her that when she was younger, she really wanted to have her own kids, but unfortunately she just wasn't able to get pregnant. And not only that, but she didn't have a lot of money, so going through an adoption agency wasn't necessarily an option. So she actually bought the daughter off the black market for adopted children in China. Meaning she didn't know if the daughter's adopted parents gave her up willingly, or if someone had taken her to put her on the black market. The mother actually passed away just shortly after that, and we haven't gotten any update from the poster if she got any more information on her biological family.
Worst ways people have died. Gary Anderson. A tape measure fell from 50 stories and hit him in the head. He was even wearing a safety helmet, but walked right past it.
The victim, apparently a very religious man, was in the middle of telling a story and uttered the words, "God is good," the moment right before he was hit and killed.
Worst ways celebrities have died. This is Rob Ford.
Ford came under intense media scrutiny during a colorful political career, which he began as a Toronto City Councillor in 2000. A staunchly conservative voice in a liberal city, Ford was elected mayor in 2010, promising to lower taxes and cut spending. Criticism from his opponents went beyond the usual political infighting, as Ford lurched from scandal to controversy. But it was substance abuse that proved to be his downfall, following a string of allegations about drunken behavior in public. That culminated in the flamboyant mayor's admission that he smoked crack cocaine in 2013, after denying it despite video evidence. Yet even under the constant glare of the media spotlight, Ford only withdrew his mayoral candidacy in 2014 because of poor health.
Actual photo of Ford. Ford in the hospital.
Nah, if people have a video of you that substance and you're gonna tell people, nah, that's not it, it wasn't that, listen, then you're bugging, bro. He really had the confidence to think he could have got away with that. That's hilarious.
Worst ways celebrities have died. XXX was withdrawing $50,000 in cash. He went to a nearby shop to get a motorcycle. On the way back, he is stopped by two men with a car. They opened fire on him and hit him with 29 shots. He later succumbed to his injuries in hospital.
That story was a little bit over exaggerated, but they didn't hit him with 29 shots. I think he got hit like with 2 shots, and they shot at him like around 5 times. He was trying to withdraw $250,000, but he was only able to withdraw $50,000. And then he went to the motorcycle place, left the motorcycle place. They came in front of his car trying to rob him, but he was just, you know what I'm saying? He has like a little bit of an ego. So when he pulled the guns out, like, yo, give me the bag, he was like, hell no. Started fighting them back. He was like, I'm not giving you my bag. And in which they shot him, and then he died. RIPX.
Here are the dumbest ways people have died, except each time it gets dumber. In 2011, Jose was a 35-year-old man attending an illegal cockfighting match in California. One of the birds got loose and accidentally stabbed Jose in the calf with a knife that was strapped to its leg. Before you feel too bad for him though, he wasn't just an attendee either, he was fined in the past for owning and training animals for fighting, so. In 1993, Gary was a lawyer in the Toronto Dominion Center and was demonstrating to other law students that the windows to the building were unbreakable. He threw his body against a window and it popped out of its frame and Gary fell 24 stories. However, Gary was right, since the window itself didn't actually break. In 2012, Greg Gingrich was vacationing at the Grand Canyon with his daughter, and he began to pretend to lose his balance and fall in an attempt to frighten her, which probably didn't work. Well, Greg was pretty committed to the bit and jumped over a protective guardrail to keep people from falling. There was a short drop below that he was gonna fall to, but he accidentally slipped and missed and fell 400 feet into the canyon, which, to his credit, probably did end up frightening his daughter. In 2018, John Allen Chau was a Christian missionary and winner of the 2018 Darwin Awards after he illegally traveled to the North Sentinel Island in India, which has the Sentinelese tribe, who voluntarily isolate themselves from any human contact and are extremely hostile to anyone that comes in contact. His sole mission that he wanted to do was to convert the tribe to Christianity, and on his first visit, he left quickly after being met with hostility. On his second visit, an arrow was shot and hit John's Bible right next to his chest. John went back a third and final time, where fishermen later saw his body being dragged by the islanders. If you think you're smarter than these people, follow.
This man is one of the worst serial killers in US history, and a lot of people don't know about him. This is the story of Dean Corll, also known as the Candyman or the Pied Piper. So Dean Corll was described as a shy, serious kid who was kind of a loner. His parents had remarried and divorced twice. His mother eventually got remarried and moved to the family to Texas. So I did mention that he goes by 2 different nicknames. And we are going to talk about both of them, but let's start with the first one, which is the Candyman. Now, he earned that nickname because when his family moved back to Texas, they opened up a candy company. Dean Corll eventually made his way to become the vice president of the candy company, and he earned a reputation of being really kind to the local children, particularly the teenage boys. Like, he put a pool table in the back of his factory so that the local kids could hang out. And he was known to give out lots of free candy. So they called Dean Corll the Candyman. He did make a couple of inappropriate advances to some of the younger staff at his company, but if they complained, he would just fire them. Then in 1967, Dean Corll met someone who is incredibly important to this story because they alter the course of each other's lives forever. In 1967, Dean Corll met David Owen Brooks, who was only 12 years old at the time. David was only in 6th grade when they met, and he was in a vulnerable position to be taken advantage of. His parents were divorced, he didn't have a lot of money, and he got made fun of all the time for the way he looked and because he wore glasses. But he started to hang out at the pool table behind Dean Corll's factory. Dean Corll gave him free candy. He gave him money if he needed it. And David said that Dean Corll was one of the first adults he had met who didn't make fun of the way he looked. And he came to view Dean Corll as a father figure in his life. He didn't know he made friends with a psychopath, though, because this is what Dean Corll was doing. Because Dean Corll exploited his trust and convinced him to let him essay him in exchange for money, which totally mind-fucked him because he eventually dropped out of high school and came to regard Dean Corll's apartment as his second home. And he unfortunately always felt a deep sense of loyalty to Dean Corll, which is so sad because he is one of those special kind of monsters that turns their victims into victimizers.
There's a really famous mystery called the Dyatlov Pass, and it's about these hikers in the 50s, these 9 really experienced hikers who are going for their what's called their level 3 mountaineering test. And the way you pass your level 3, you have to map out this route. They use the Ural Mountains, so big, snow-swept, like huge icy mountains. And so they brought cameras with them. They set off on this journey, and I think they reached the first checkpoint. I forget what it is, but they didn't make it to whatever second checkpoint or whatever it was. And there was a protocol for the people who were sort of sponsoring this test, where if they missed a checkpoint, there's like this big search that goes out to make sure they're okay. So they missed the checkpoint, this protocol is enacted, and not only are there pictures that we will get from the hikers, but there was cameras that came with the search crew. They follow the trail that they're supposed to be on. This is, again, there's no trees. It's just like the tundra. It's like ice and snow and mountains. And they come across this mountain off in the distance, and they see on the windswept side of the mountain, basically halfway up, are these tents that are just these like canvas tents. You can barely see them, but they're situated right in the middle of the slope, which is like strategically one of the worst places you can place these tents. So immediately they're thinking, 1, it has to be the hikers, because who else is out here right now? But 2, why in the world would these incredibly talented hikers, why would they ever pitch their tent there? This is the most hazardous part. The wind can whip you off. So they see these tents. They're in the wrong spot. They go up to the tents, and the hikers aren't there. They're not in there. There's pictures of this too. The tents inside had stacks of clothing neatly folded and placed in the corners, like they left their clothes behind. And the tents themselves were cut open, like with a knife, but somehow they deduced that they had been cut open, but from the inside. So presumably one or multiple of the mountaineers chose to cut open these tents in like negative 50-degree weather. And then there were all these prints in the snow that led down the mountain. And some of the prints were bare feet, some had one shoe and one barefoot. And it's all 9 of the hikers. They spotted these prints, and they follow the prints down the hill or the mountains, a big space. And they find this little crops of trees. And when they get to the trees, they find 3 of the hikers, and they're all deceased. And there's one who's basically almost naked, wrapped up on the ground. There's pictures of this. There's one who I believe was draped over one of the branches up in one of the trees, and then another one that was also on the ground as well. And there's these deep scratch marks in the tree, like gouges on the tree, as if some animal had been scratching at this tree. And all 3 of these hikers are deceased. There's more footprints that lead away from those 3 about a mile, kind of back in the direction the search party had come from. And there's this big snowdrift that created sort of like a snow cave underneath it. And the footprints lead into the snow cave where the other 6 hikers were, and they're all deceased as well. Except in there, the hikers had seemingly exchanged clothing, and they know this because the women were wearing men's clothing and vice versa. Some of their clothes had trace levels of radiation, and some of them had parts of their face removed, it looked like. Lips, nose, ears, it almost looked like surgical precision removal. They're all deceased, and one of the injuries, there was a person in there who their chest had basically been caved in, and it was deduced that the impact it would have taken, the impact would have been equivalent to like a speeding car smashing into it full speed. But there's no sign of anything that could have done this damage. And so they're all deceased. And so the Soviet government, they launched an investigation. And during this investigation, they discovered that there was a huge military exercise, a Russian military exercise taking place in the Ural Mountains, who had no idea about these hikers. They have no clue that the level 3 mountaineering test is going on. It's not even on their radar. And they're 15, 20 miles away. And one of their senior commanders, on the same night that it's believed the hikers all died and whatever happened to them happened, he began noticing all these strange lights in the sky over the Ural Mountains, going up and down and moving all around, to the point where he actually thought it was another country, a foreign country. Are they invading us? And he literally thought it was like an invasion of Russia. And he sent out messages to say, hey, what's happening over there? Having no idea that he was pointing to the one spot where these hikers were. So during this investigation, they discover that families are clamoring for information about their lost loved ones. Nobody has any idea what's going on. And suddenly the Soviet government says, oh, we're going to shut this investigation down. All we know is that the 9 hikers who died from an unknown, unnatural force. Sealed.
This CCTV footage shows this woman's last moments before she was brutally murdered by this man, only moments later. Hi, I'm Meg. I talk about true crime. Let's get into this case. Grace Millane was only 22 and she had just graduated from the University of Lincoln. She was really excited about what was next to come. She had spent years saving up for a backpacking trip, and it was finally time for her to go. First, she went to South America for around 6 weeks. And according to her family, she was bombarding them with updates and pictures. She was a family girl. In November of 2018, she arrived in New Zealand. She was doing the whole solo travel thing, so she was on her own. Over a week later, she made her way to Auckland, where she checked into a hostel. Overall, she seemed to have been having a great time. December 1st, 2018, only a day before her birthday, she leaves the hostel at 6 p.m. to meet up with a guy from Tinder. This Tinder date's name was Jesse and he was 26 years old. You can see them meeting here in the CCTV footage and heading over to a restaurant/bar. Grace was being safe and she was texting her friend during the entire date, telling her that they were really compatible and that was going well. Jesse was apparently living in a hotel at the time, and around 9:30 they decided to head there. And these are Grace's last moments seen alive. The footage that comes after this is insane. December 2nd, aka the next day, was Grace's birthday, so her loved ones from England just started sending her loads of texts. Happy birthday, they were trying to call her. She wasn't responding, which was extremely out of character for her. Now, let me show you what Jesse was doing on the 2nd of December. Here's Jesse leaving the hotel. Here's Jesse up in that corner, buying a suitcase, returning it to the hotel, buying cleaning supplies, and lifting these suitcases back into the elevator and into a rental car that he bought that day. That same day, he even bought carpet cleaner, like a whole machine that cleans carpets, and told the hotel it was because he spilled some red wine on the floor. Safe to say he's looking a bit suspicious. By December 5th, Grace's family had not heard back from her yet. At this point, they had a really bad feeling, and so they called the Auckland police to let them know that she was missing. So they filed the missing persons report, and the Auckland police started digging. The police did an amazing job in this case.
This is Worst Deaths Imaginable number 67. Viewer discretion is advised. Pictured here was the lovely Elizabeth Mary Isherwood of Wales, which is in the United Kingdom. In September of 2017, she was vacationing. She had gone to the city of Machynlleth, which is in Wales, and she was staying at the Plas Tolgarth, if I'm saying that correctly, a popular holiday home. On the first night that Elizabeth checked in, other guests would report hearing banging noises coming from her room. Noises they would later say they thought was just maintenance. It wasn't. Now, I don't know what an airing cupboard is. To my knowledge, we don't have those in the United States unless they're called something different. So if someone from the United Kingdom sees this and can explain exactly what it is, I looked up images, I've seen things like this, possibly this, maybe something a little deeper than the last one, like this, but I don't know. So I don't have an accurate image of the room she was found in. But in the middle of the night, it's believed that she got up to use the restroom and had accidentally walked into the airing cupboard. Somehow the door closed and locked behind her. Now, it's believed that at first, Elizabeth began banging on the door, banging on the walls, in hopes that someone might hear her. She was also likely screaming for help. But no one came. No one responded. It is then believed that she began to try to claw her way out of the room, literally. It was a small room, apparently, and it had bricks on the walls, so I guess she was digging through that to try to make a hole. And she did this for likely 24 hours at least. And she actually did make a hole in the wall. And it's believed that she was a couple inches away from being able to, I guess, open the door. But during the process of her digging through the wall, she managed to burst a pipe that was inside the walls. When she did so, water would come spraying down from the ceiling and the walls. It's also important to note that she was not wearing any clothing, and she had nothing in there to cover herself with, and nothing to warm herself up. For at least the next couple of days, yes, she was constantly being rained on by freezing cold water, and she continued to bang and scream, but again, no one came to her rescue. After a few days, maintenance finally went to the room because of the water leakage, and the deceased body of Elizabeth was found. She had died of hypothermia. For a couple of days, she slowly froze to death. The family did sue, but I cannot find the outcome.
This is one of those cases that doesn't sit right with me. This is Dorothy Jane Scott. She was murdered in the 1980s, and for years, the killer tormented her family with phantom phone calls. And to this day, they are still out there somewhere. So let's dive into the story. So the story of Dorothy's disappearance is really strange. On the night of May 28, 1980, Dorothy drove two of her friends to the hospital, as one of them had been bitten by a spider that night. So at the end of the hospital visit, while they were waiting to get a prescription filled, Dorothy Jane walked to go grab her car and bring it up so that the two friends could meet her outside. And once they were outside, the friends saw Dorothy's car coming towards them, but it quickly sped off and left them there. Now, they couldn't see who exactly was in the car, who was driving, because the headlights blinded them, but in a few hours, they reported her missing because they couldn't get in contact with Dorothy. And she would be missing for years. So in the months leading up to her murder, Dorothy had acquired a stalker. She had been receiving phone calls at work from a strange, unidentified male caller. And on these phone calls, this guy would tell her how much he loved her, and then he would state that he intended on killing her soon. One day, this phantom man even told Dorothy to go outside because he left a surprise on her car, and when she went outside to look, there was a single dead rose on her windshield, which is very creepy. On one of these particularly gruesome phone calls, the caller even stated that he planned on abducting Dorothy and chopping her up into little bits so that no one would ever find her. So these phone calls obviously terrified Dorothy, and in the week leading up to her disappearance, she started taking karate lessons. Okay, so let's flash back to the night that Dorothy disappeared. Remember, her friends were waiting for her outside of the hospital when they saw her car speed by them, but they couldn't see who was inside the vehicle. At around 4:30 a.m. that morning, 5 hours or so after they saw her car speeding away, the car was found abandoned in an alleyway 10 miles from the hospital, and it was on fire, which torched all evidence that could have been in the vehicle. So Dorothy would be missing for years, 4 years in fact. But it only took 1 week after her disappearance for the killer to start calling her own parents. So about every Wednesday afternoon for a period after Dorothy went missing, this caller would call her parents and say the strangest things. He would tell them things like, "I have her." He would also claim that he was the one who killed Dorothy. He was basically tormenting her parents and saying that he knows exactly where she is and what had happened, but he was never going to tell them. Now, 4 years later, this was going on for 4 years, in April of 1984, this caller once again called Dorothy's family, but instead of her mom picking up the phone that night, her dad did. And after her dad picked up the phone calls completely stopped. That is, until a few months later. Now, in August of 1984, a construction worker would come across a set of bones that belonged to a human and a dog. And those bones were eventually revealed to be those of Dorothy's. And immediately after her remains were found, the caller once again began to call her parents. This time, the police installed a recorder that bugged the family's phones. They were trying to get this guy's voice on recording and trace the phone calls, but the calls were never long enough for them to trace, and they still had no idea who this guy was. To this day, authorities still don't know how Dorothy died. And even though the phone calls eventually stopped, the killer's never been brought to justice.
Now, the only suspect that's ever emerged in this case still doesn't have a name. It's the same guy that called, obviously, Dorothy's family, but it was a man who called a local newspaper just a few days after Dorothy went missing. And on this phone call, this guy said that he loved Dorothy, she had been cheating on him, and that he was the one who killed her. So that means that to this day, this killer is probably still out there somewhere, and they've never been brought to justice. This crime occurred over 40 years ago. There are no leads, and I don't think that this is a case that will ever be solved. If this killer dies, I'm sure that they're going to take this secret to the grave with them.
This might be the most gruesome death of all time, and whatever you do, don't look up the picture. This is 18-year-old Nikki Castoris, and on Halloween 2006, she crashed her father's Porsche 11 driving at more than 100 miles per hour. She was trying to switch lanes when she suddenly clipped another car, lost control, and then flew over the middle of the highway onto traffic lanes and into a concrete toll booth. And when police arrived, they walked into literally a nightmare. They arrived minutes later and they found Nikki's body still strapped to the driver's seat, but her head, however, was no longer attached to it. Nikki's head was completely severed in half, and it wasn't a head anymore. I can't even describe what it looks like because it's so disturbing. The wreckage and the scene were so brutal that the coroner wouldn't let her parents identify her body. But unfortunately, her parents were not spared from seeing the gruesome scene. Photographs of Nikki's death had somehow found their way onto the internet, and they spread extremely quickly. MySpace pages who were acting as some sort of tribute for Nikki's death posted the horrifying pictures of the accident. Nikki's parents then received countless emails of the photographs, and there was no escaping the trauma. I really urge you never to look up this photo because it might be one of the most disturbing things you will ever see. This case should be an eye-opener to everybody to not drive recklessly, because as you can tell, your life could be taken from you in a split second.
Dude, the internet is a demon, dude. It went viral and the people found her parents and sent her parents emails of the pictures. That's crazy.
This is the worst way somebody has ever died, and whatever you do, never look up the picture. This is Hisashi Ouchi, and he became the most radioactive man in history after a lab accident. On September 30th, 1999, the 34-year-old Hisashi and two other co-workers were working at the Takamura nuclear plant in Takamura, Japan, and they were put on an extremely tight deadline by their superiors. The plant converted uranium hexafluoride into enriched uranium for the purposes of nuclear energy. This usually involved a carefully timed multi-step process, but Hisashi and his co-workers attempted to take a shortcut to meet their deadlines, but this led to an horrific explosion of uranium solution that turned into a nightmare for Hisashi. The plant underwent emergency evacuation and the three men were immediately rushed to help. They all had been directly exposed to harmful radiation, but to different degrees. The sole survivor of the group was exposed to 3 sieverts of radiation, the second one was exposed to 10 sieverts of radiation, and Hisashi was exposed to a whopping 17 sieverts of radiation, which was more than any human in history. And by the time Hisashi arrived at the hospital, his body was already covered in burns, and his eyes were leaking blood, but his agony had just begun. 3 days after the accident, Hisashi was transferred to the University of Tokyo Hospital. Hisashi's lack of white blood cells and his non-existent immune response prompted experts to try a number of procedures to save him. Doctors tried countless skin grafts and blood transfusions, and even stem cell transplants, but sadly none of these seemed to work. Hisashi soon cried out, "I can't take it anymore, I'm not a guinea pig," just after 1 week of treatment. But although Hisashi begged for his death, his family insisted that doctors kept him alive to keep trying experimental treatments. Hisashi's skin began to melt off his body, and even after this, his relatives ordered his doctors to do whatever it took to keep him alive. All in all, Hisashi was kept alive against his will for a disturbing 83 days. At one point, he suffered 3 heart attacks in 1 hour. Following the guidelines from his family, the doctors resurrected him again and again. Every time he died, he came back and suffered extreme brain damage. And on December 21st, 1999, Hisashi finally died of his last heart attack after multi-organ failure, and it was only then that his torture stopped. You really can't fathom the amount of pain this man was in until you see the photo of him. He doesn't even look human and kind of looks like an insect. The radiation poisoning is that bad, but I really don't recommend you look it up. But if you do, while you're looking at it, keep in mind he was kept alive for 83 days in that state. Could you honestly imagine what was going through his head and what his body was feeling?
I actually made a video about that topic of that dude with the most radiation burns of all time. Yeah, that was like one of my first ever YouTube videos ever made. I might try to link it in this video actually.
I may fail, but if I fail, I want to die trying. We're all gonna die anyways. It's just a matter of how and when.
Only moments after that video was recorded, Pedro Ruiz was shot dead with a Desert Eagle. All of this was captured on camera as a part of his first YouTube video. So this all happened in 2017. Pedro and his girlfriend Mona Lisa had been dating for a while. They had a child together. And at the time that this video was recorded, Mona Lisa was pregnant with their second child. Pedro had big dreams of becoming a YouTuber, and he thought he could really break into the YouTube scene by having his girlfriend shoot him in the chest with a Desert Eagle. Pedro believed that by holding a thick book in front of him, he could stop the bullet. This is an actual crime scene photo of the book that was used in the filming of this video, and you can see that it clearly did not stop the bullet. Right before this video was filmed, Mona Lisa tweeted out, "Me and Pedro are probably going to shoot one of the most dangerous videos ever. His idea, not mine." A lot of this footage is online, but you can see Pedro taking out the golden Desert Eagle, waving it around, but investigators have never released the footage of the actual fatal shot that took his life. Sadly, you can see in the transcript of the video, though, that Mona Lisa was extremely hesitant to do this. In the first place, she hadn't wanted to shoot her boyfriend with a gun. She had been pressured into it. And in the footage, she says, "Babe, I'm not doing this. I can't. If I kill you, what's going to happen to my life? Like, no, this isn't okay." And Pedro in the transcript keeps reassuring her, saying, "As long as you hit the book, you'll be fine." Well, sadly, Mona Lisa did hit the book with the bullet. It was actually a pretty accurate shot there, but unfortunately, the bullet went straight through the book and took Pedro's life. Now, afterwards, Mona Lisa was left alone with their two children, and she was eventually sentenced to a 180-day jail term. But ever since the accident, Mona Lisa has really tried to turn her life around. She's actively talked about this whole situation. She's still active on social media. And I have to say, I actually went to school with Mona Lisa when I was younger, and she was a great person. I couldn't believe that this happened. I couldn't believe seeing this on the news. And yeah, just what a tragic story for all parties involved. And also, if you like true crime...
Worst ways people have lost their lives. Part 34. Nabil Rahman, an 11-year-old boy. He was coming home from school when he got into the elevator with other people. The lift got stuck between the second and third floors. Both the inner and outer doors were open. Nabil stuck his head out, but at that moment, the elevator suddenly dropped, crushing his skull. Colin Whitaker, 64 years old. He was at a movie theater in England with his partner. During the film, he dropped his phone and bent down to pick it up. Suddenly, the motorized footrest of his seat lowered automatically, trapping his head. Although Colin managed to sit back up, he suffered a fatal heart attack just seconds later. Will Page, a 22-year-old British man. After working on his van in an industrial area of Derbyshire, he was heading home. While driving, a gust of wind violently moved a safety bar. The bar pierced through the windshield and struck him directly in the chest, killing him instantly.
The worst ways to die in history. To be beautiful in the Victorian era, you had to be very, very thin. This was naturally quite hard to achieve, but there was one diet that was all the rage. The tapeworm diet. The patient would willfully take a pill containing the egg of a tapeworm, which they then raise inside of their stomach for months until it grew to maturity, feeding on all of their calories and helping them to achieve that coveted 16-inch waist. That's to say if it didn't kill them first. Most tapeworms attach to the intestine, but larvae can also attach to the heart, eyes, lungs, or brain. They can grow up to 30 feet long, and excreting one is a horrific experience that can take days. And what happens if the worm doesn't come out the other end on its own? Well, doctors would go fishing inside the patient's digestive tract, inserting a metal cylinder stuffed with bait through the host's mouth down into their intestines. The procedure often caused the patient to choke to death before the worm could even be caught. And you might be wondering why this was so popular, but remember, this was a time when people ingested mercury and bathed in arsenic, so this kind of thing was par for the course.
Crazy ways people have died, part 1. In 2010, a man named Sam Ballard was dared by his drunk friends to eat a slug. And so he did. Little did he know the slug gave him a parasite, which made him paralyzed and sick. He stayed this way for 8 years till 2018, when he was 28. The sickness became too much for him, and he died. Stop just putting stuff in your mouths! Stop!
Eating a slug is crazy. I never even knew slugs were that deadly, for real. There was this challenge where people would eat goldfish wholes, but I don't think anyone specifically died from that. I don't know, dude. People always just do some stupid things, and then sometimes people don't think something could be that big, becomes their biggest regret, and they're gone.
Thank you all for watching this here video. Please like and subscribe.